Welcome back. CSS230 W1 to part 2 of float review, which we're doing in Replit. And we just started our CSS, and all we have right now is just something that looks like that, and we're going to make it look nice. So we're going to go in and start targeting our class names. Now we have class names of box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, and we also have a class name of container, which is actually a section element named class name, and we have divs named box 1 and box 2, box 3. And that's all we're going to style right now is just those 4 boxes and the container that they're in. So I'm going to start with the container that they're in by going to CSS, and I already have my CSS linked up because I took away my margin and padding with the reset. So what I'm going to do next is go to container, and I could just put container. I don't need to have section.container. I could just put container. I could just target the class name, and that's the nice thing about using class names, and that is considered best practice for CSS and HTML, is using lots of class names so you can target them individually and not rely on a lot of parents and children and things like that. So we're going to target container, and we're going to give it just some basic padding. I'll put padding, and I'll use an element called ems, which basically 1em is basically 16 pixels, whatever the default font size is, and we're not changing the default font size, so it'll be about 16 pixels. So I'm just going to use 1em. Actually, I'm going to use 2em. I'll put a little more around that, and we'll use less padding inside the paragraphs. So for the whole container, we'll do that. So make sure you put your semicolon. So padding, and I'm going to give it a background color just so we recognize it, so we could see it as we go. So background color, and if you don't see a color show up, just backspace and then put the colon, and I'll just use like a light blue. And if you're not sure, I think if you start typing light blue, you'll find it. And there's light blue, and that should be fine. So we got a light blue color, we have a padding, and we shouldn't have to do anything else, I don't think, for now, other than, well, let's just wait, because we have that overflow auto that we'll have to deal with. But let's just wait and see why we need that. So if I run this right now, and I preview it, there it is. So everything looks fine right now. That's the way it should look. That's our padding, our 2em padding, which is about 32 pixels if it's 2em going around. Whatever the font size is, the default font size, which would be a little bit bigger than the capital letters, that's about right. All right, so we have that. And now what we're going to target is all of the boxes. And I'll show you this. There's different ways to do this. I'm going to target container, because remember the boxes all have individual names. And I'm going to target container, and I'm going to use this div. And what this is, just so you're aware of it, because you'll see this just means you'll also see a space, or you'll see this arrow here. And what the arrow means is it's a direct child, all the divs which are the direct child of container, or the div which the parent is container. So it's the direct descendant of those. So all the divs which are the direct parent of those. Now, you might say, well, what's the difference if it's a space, if they're the divs inside, or if they're the divs which is a direct child? Well, they could be grandchildren. There could be divs inside of divs inside of divs. Which ones are you talking about? We're talking about the first divs, the first child of container divs. That's what that means when you see that little arrow there. So we're going to use that, and you'll see that at times, and we may even change that. But for now, let's do that. This will target all of those boxes. So all of those box divs, which are here, those 4 divs, those are the divs which are the children of the section which has the class name of container. Okay, so we're going to target all of them, and we'll give them all the same properties because they're all going to have a certain padding. I'm just going to put like a padding of 1em, just to be a little less. And I'll put a background color, even though we're going to change this. Let's put a background color for all of them the same right now. And I'll just make it like a light gray, just so we can identify it before we change it. So I'll use light gray for now. And then also we'll put a width of 25%. We'll have 4 going across, so we'll just make them 25%. That's going to be the width of every one of these. So each one is going to be 25% taking up the page. So let's see what happens here. I think you know what's going to happen. Or do you? What is going to happen? Actually, they should actually stack on each other and only be a quarter of the way across the page, because we didn't float anything yet. We're not using any floats yet. It's float review, but we didn't float anything. So let's go here, and so now they're stacked, and that's fine. They're 25% of the page of our window, but we want to float them next to each other. So let's go in here and do float. And I'm actually going to do the float. I'll do the float second. I'll say float here. And we could just do float left. That means they all float left of each other. And that's fine to be able to do. That's fine to do that. So we'll do float left, and I'll just hit run and refresh it. And that's what's happening right now. Now, the problem, we have two problems. One is it's not even getting across the page because the 25%, it's adding up the math with the padding that's inside here, and there's not enough room to fit it all in, so it's already starting to wrap. And we also have this overflow issue with the container. So that's easy to fix. So if we just do overflow auto, see, these are the little things with floats that can be an issue. Overflow auto, that should fix that. I'll just hit run and I'll refresh it. And now that's okay. So we took care of that with overflow auto of the container. Now we still have the issue where it's not putting them across. It's not working. They're just kind of wrapping right now, which isn't always a problem. But in this case, we want them taking up 4 parts of the page going across. They're not even getting to those 4. And that's, like I said, the 25% is adding up. So what you could do, you could go in here and be like, oh, let me try 23% and see if that works. And that helps a little bit. And you could try 22%. And there's a whole like math you could use to figure it out too. Let's see if that works. And that actually works. And then when it gets smaller, it's still breaking. So that's why we actually had to use that thing of instead of changing these percents all the time, they have a thing called box sizing. And if I just type box sizing and then start typing border box, that's a little fix for that. And I never even knew that existed. I used to do all the math to figure that out, but that really helps things a lot. It's just still more work you have to add to this. So let's do that. And again, I don't even know if you have to hit run, because run shows up over here, but I get used to doing that almost like saving. So if I do this, you can see it stretches out a little bit. Now it's working. And now that's working. It's still 25% no matter what size you make the window. So that's what we want. And what we're going to do next is color these separately. So to do that, we can target box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4. Now we can copy them once we do them. And what should happen is that class name should, and I'm saying should here, should override the original one, because we already have them gray, so we should override. We're being more specific now. And I'll go down here and I'll put box 1. And remember, you have to put a period when it's a class name. And I'll put box 1 and I'll target that. And what I'm going to target is just a background color. And you can put any colors you want here. I'm just going to look for light background color. I'll type light and I'll look for something light. Light coral, light salmon, light sea green, whatever. Just find 4 different ones. Light golden yellow, or that's goldenrod yellow. I'll do that. Just do 4 different colors. And once you do that, once you have one, you can just copy that. So I'll copy this. I'll copy 3 more. And I'll make sure this is box 2, box 3, and box 4. And these colors here, I could go in here, and if I backspace and do the colon again and even start typing light, I could find other light colors. There's a light cyan. I'll get rid of this one. I'll start my colon and I'll type light. And there's light pink. Again, I don't care what color you use, just kind of make them different. And this one, maybe I'll do like a greenish color. And I'll start typing light. And there's a light green. Although I think it's a little on the dark side. But if it's too dark, remember you could hover over here and you go a little lighter if you want. Move that over. Make sure you move that little dot around. So now it changed the color name to RGB, but that's okay. So you would think that these would override the general that we're using here, this kind of general term. And let's see what happens here. I can hit run again. And it actually doesn't. And I was perplexed myself because it should. But the reason it doesn't, I think, is because it's using dot container. And actually, if you put dot container, the full name, and a space, if you said box 1 within dot container, and now you try it out, it will change that. So now you'd have to put dot container because it's recognizing these as the divs inside of dot container. But here, not having dot container is like an issue with it. So this is where some of the naming stuff can be a problem. Now this was fine what we did, but if you remember on our first exercise, we went and did something like this. We went in here and we gave it 2 names. We gave it a general name of box, and then a space, and then it meant it had two names. So they all share the name box, and then they all have individual names. It's like you're giving them two names. And I'll put the box up here. So now they all have a general name box and a more specific class name with the number after it. So actually what happens now, what we could do is, instead of having all the divs inside of container, we could just go here and put .box. And now these specific ones should override the first one. So box is the general, just like we had before. Same thing, it's still dealing with the same thing, but now these should override, because now the specific names are kind of on an even keel versus this, because they're just class names versus class names, whereas before it was showing the parent, and that was kind of not letting these class names override because it was written a little bit differently. So that's why we do some of this stuff. It can get confusing, and it's confusing for anybody, but now we have class names here that are more specific and class name here that's more general. So that light gray should be overridden by the colors here. Whenever you rewrite something, even if you rewrote it here, if you put background color a second time, it should use the newest one. But let's see what happens now. I'll just hit run, I'll refresh it, and now they all have their colors. So now it's all working with their colors. And again, we're using the first class name, which is for all of them, and the second class names are more specific. So we have the first class names, which they all share, and the second class name is the specific one. So now we could target all of those, and we don't have to use parents or anything like that. We could just target them as long as we know how we're naming them. So we just have container and we have that. So that's working fine. Now one last thing we'll do is we'll make this kind of reset at about 620. And remember, if you can't see the width of your screen, if you right click on here, I'm control clicking on a Mac, and inspect, and you start to move it, and we'll talk about this inspect panel that's in your browser. But if you start to move this, when these columns get real small, it's about 620. Actually, I'm right at 620, and it could be 650, 640. It doesn't really matter if you did 640. There's, the pixels are very small, so the difference between 20 pixels is very small. Maybe I'll do 640, and I'll close this up. So when it gets to this point, we're going to break it so it actually starts stacking, and that's where we're going to do a media query. And I never even remember the exact writing for media queries because I'm always copying and pasting, so I don't always memorize that, but you have it right here. So you could go into your styles of your first one and go in there and find your media query, which is at the end, and you got to be careful with this. And I'm just going to highlight this part, this first line here. And I'll even highlight the comment that I had. So I have to remember that I'm going to need a closing curly brace around everything, and then each style is still going to have an opening and closing curly brace. So I'm going to copy this from my ex4 styles and then go back to my ex5 styles and put this at the end. And I'm going to also put my closing brace there, and I'm going to put a bunch of spaces in between so I know that I'm inside here. And now what I'm going to do is I just have to change, I don't have to change anything with the container, I just have to change box really, because these things aren't going to change. I just have to change the general nature of them so they no longer float, and we also change their width. So that's what's going to change with them. So their background colors are going to stay the same, so nothing's going to change. The only thing that's going to change is going to be the float property, and we won't need the background color anymore because it's being overrode right now, and we only have to use what's changing. But I'm going to copy them all. I'm going to copy the whole declaration block, copy it, and put it inside here. And I'm going to hit tab and make sure it's kind of indented so it looks nice. And what I like to do is make sure this is indented. I'm going to move this back here so I could see those two curly braces, so that lines up with that. And then I'm even going to tab these in so it looks a little bit nicer, so they look like all the other styles. And I'm not changing the padding, so I can get rid of that. Changing the float to none, so I need that. And the background color, I'm not using it anyway, so I might as well get rid of it. And the width is definitely changing. That's going to be 100. And border box is not changing. That I should still keep that, so it should still use the border box that's in there. It should still keep that, so I don't need it. Remember, you only have to put declarations that are changing. And if it's not going to float, you do have to put float none. You can't just eliminate the float. Just its absence will not mean it's not going to use that. And maybe I'll change this to 640. And just make sure that you have your pair. Make sure you click on here and you see the closing for the media query, and you click on here and you see your opening and closing for the box. Now box, again, is the general class name for all 4 boxes. These are the individual names for all 4 boxes. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to run, which I probably don't have to do, but I'm just in the habit of doing that. And I'll just refresh it, and it shouldn't look any different until I resize it and it gets to about 640. They should stack, and that looks good. And that's kind of how it would look on a phone. So that's all we're practicing here. That's the media query, which is pretty simple. Just wanted to go over some of those steps with naming, some of the steps with floats. We're going to start using something called CSS Flex, and then eventually something called CSS Grid to make things a little bit easier when we want kind of columns and rows set up. Things like this are going to be easier when we use something called Flex. We don't have to use all those little overflow auto, and well, we might have to use overflow auto, but we don't have to use, no, I don't think we should. I don't think we need overflow auto. We're not going to have to put box sizing, box border, and all those little things. Sometimes we don't even have to use percentages. We're just going to put how many we want to cross. So it's a framework that's part of CSS, and it's native to CSS, so you don't have to import anything, but you just have to use a little bit different of a naming scheme, which is CSS Flex. It's all in W3 Schools. We'll do a little exercise with it, and we'll even use one of these exercises or even our previous ex4 to kind of change that to incorporate it just to see the difference. So we'll copy one of our folders and do it with Flex when we do that the next time around. But that's floating review, or float review for ex5. That's the end of part 2. So just get that done. And in your unit, which may be still unit 6, just indicate that it's complete when you do this. This is a quick one. This shouldn't take that long. And again, I'm updating all the discussion threads, so you can go back and do all your discussion posts, even dating back to week 3. Just go back and do them and get them done. I've been focusing on recording videos, not as much on the discussion, so make sure you get those done. And then just put complete in your comment when you're done with this. You don't have to send me a link anymore because I can always use your first link to do that. However, if you want to throw a link in there, there's nothing wrong with just copying this link and putting it in there. That probably saves a little bit of time. So you can either put the link in there, or you could just say complete, and I'll just go find your link from the first time. That's assuming you did ex4. So just want to mention that when you're done, you just close this up. There's no save, so everything's okay. So I'll be able to see that. Just make sure that you link from your original index page, and that you're linking to ex5 so that you can go and see that there. If not, you just have to put in ex5 when you do that. So that's your ex5 float review. Hope that helped a little bit. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll give you some more videos to watch on Flex coming up.